Then he put Johnson on the shelf. Big mistake. There was a lot Johnson could have done. Again, Johnson knew how to manipulate, bargain, log roll. What's log rolling? That's where you get to a congressman. If you're a congressman, you go to another state, listen, I know you want this bill passed, so I will support your bill if you'll support mine. That's log rolling. And that's the way things are done. I mean, it's just in politics, as usual. Johnson knew how to, also did us believe that Johnson could threaten, hey, if you don't do this, I'll isolate you. I'll make sure you don't get on your favorite committee, whatever. Johnson knew how to do that. But Johnson was shoved aside. We never heard much about him during the 3 years that Kennedy was president. Very rarely did we hear anything at all about him. Now, something else so that we did not know at the time. We now know that John Kennedy was a womanizer. In those days, everybody in Washington knew it. The press hushed it up. We did not begin to find out about it until 1967. The Secret Service learned that when John Kennedy went to bed at night, if a pretty woman came up to the room, they were to let her through. Perhaps if Jackie wasn't there. Okay, so for instance, and Jackie spent a lot of her time with Aristotle Onassis over in Greece, so Jackie was away a lot. And when Jackie was away, the Secret Service would wonder, now, what if this woman was sent to assassinate him? What if this woman poisons him? What if this woman hurts him? What are we going to tell the American people? They didn't know, but they were told, let her in. One woman that they let in was a woman named Ellen Romsch, and you can look this up here. Her name is spelled R-O-E-M-S-C-H. Ellen Romsch was an East German woman who may have been a communist spy. And we don't know how many secrets John Kennedy might have given to this woman, but finally, John Kennedy's brother, Robert, who was doing everything he could to protect the president, his brother, the president, Robert Kennedy gave Ellen Romsch a one-way plane ticket back to East Germany. And she knew that if she didn't take this one-way plane ticket, when you're dealing with a Kennedy brother, she could expect to have an accident of souls. To this day, Ellen Romsch, she's an old woman now, she will not talk. How much information she got from the president, we don't know. But now, I once heard that on the day Kennedy was shot, the Senate was meeting in a secret session to discuss his affair with Ellen Romsch, because she might have been a communist spy, and Robert was there trying to defend his brother. And this session was so super secret that nobody was to go in unless it was a national emergency, or the news that the president had been shot. That was a national emergency, so someone went in and said, hey, the president's been shot, and that broke up the meeting. I was alive back then. I was 12 and 13 years old. I did not know, and nobody knows what would have happened. Now today, our moral standard is much less, and then later on, we had presidents who had open affairs, particularly Bill Clinton, and he survived it. But in those days, the country was not ready for that kind of stuff. What would have happened if the news of his affair? He also had an affair with Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe died in August 1962, supposedly of suicide. However, there are persons who believe that Robert Kennedy killed her. Robert Kennedy was at a party 50 miles away. Everybody knows this. Robert Kennedy disappeared from that party for 9 hours. Now, during those 9 hours, Marilyn Monroe died. 9 persons saw Robert Kennedy near Marilyn Monroe's apartment, including 2 policemen who were supposed to be accurate. But that doesn't prove it. The window to Marilyn Monroe's apartment was broken, and the glass fell inside. Now, I've broken a few windows myself. When the glass falls inside, that means whoever broke it had to have been outside. In other words, someone outside broke Marilyn Monroe's window. We don't know if they got in. We don't know. Anyway, Marilyn Monroe died, and Robert Kennedy appeared back up at the party 50 miles away. Why would they want Marilyn Monroe killed? Because Marilyn Monroe was about to tell the whole world, I have had sex with the President of the United States. And again, this would have ruined John Kennedy. in those days. Today, I mean, he could probably survive it. Our moral standard is lower. All right. Now, on November 22nd, 1963, Vice President Johnson asked John Kennedy to come to Texas to kind of get Texas in line, because after all, the next year, 1964's election year, the first primary was only about 3 months away. And they wanted to get Texas in line. There are stories that Johnson was the one who ordered the motorcade to go under the textbook depository at the Neely Plaza. Now, if you've read any books about Kennedy, the word Neely Plaza, textbook depository, all familiar terms to you. Grassy knoll, yes. Anyway, John Kennedy was shot. He died. He was probably dead when the first bullet hit him, but when he got into the hospital, he showed a faint pulse. There was no brain. He's completely lost his brains. His brains have been lost from that day till this. And the Secret Service immediately cleaned up the car, sent the damaged car up to Detroit for repairs. Why was the car cleaned up so fast? Well, okay. There have been more than 200 books written about the Kennedy assassination. Was it a conspiracy? Was the CIA involved? And yes, even was Lyndon Johnson involved. After all, he was the one who ordered the motorcade. Now, as for Oswald, he could not find a job, so finally someone found him a job in the textbook depository. So he was there because he worked there, not because he worked there. Again, folk, the issue, I mean, all right, I'll stop. Anybody have any comments? Anybody have any thoughts on the subject? I mean, you people, none of you can remember. I mean, I can remember it. I was sitting in study hall when it happened. It was a Friday, and our first basketball game was to begin that night. We did play the game, by the way. We had a pep rally. And about the last period of the day, the study hall teacher came and said, somebody has been shot in Dallas. We don't know the story in this detail. Then the principal came on and turned the radio on to where we could, all of us who wanted to hear the radio could hear it. Well, I was in study hall, so our teacher wanted to hear it. We went to the pep rally. At the end of the pep rally, the principal said, I hate to tell you this, but the President of the United States is dead. Mm-hmm. Now, we went into the pep rally not knowing if he was dead or not, but they announced he was dead while we were, during the time we were at the pep rally, cheering our team on for our team's first game. This was on Friday. Now, folk, there are some interesting parallels between Kennedy and Lincoln. I'm going to go into a few of them.
I read that online.
You've read it online?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. All right. Kennedy became president in 1960, Lincoln in 1860. The assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, John Wilkes Booth, were both of men known by all three names. The number of letters in all three names is the same. The two men were born 100 years apart. The same year, like 1834, I believe, and 1934, but 100 years apart. Both men were shot on Friday. Both men were shot in the back of the head. Both men had their wives sitting on their left when they were shot. It's a coincidence. Both men had vice presidents named Johnson. Now, Lincoln was killed at Ford Theater. Kennedy was killed in a Lincoln that was built by Ford. If you know anything about cars, Ford builds the Lincoln. Ford Motor Company. Now, Lincoln, Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln. Mrs. Lincoln advised John Kennedy to not go to Dallas. They told us for years that Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy, but they started doing the research. No, Lincoln did not have a secretary named Kennedy. But Mrs. Lincoln was on the verge of resigning, and she was going to tell the whole country what she knew. Then her boss died, and she held off for 4 years, but eventually she told the country what she knew about the ineptness and corruption of the Kennedy administration. John Kennedy, anyway, let's see, there are some, maybe see if I can think of a few more.
There's one more where you said, I think
Well, both of them were assassinated with Southerners. What's that?
John Wilkes Booth assassinated Lincoln in a theater and hid out in a warehouse, and Oswald shot in a warehouse.
And hid out in a theater. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Both men were Southerners.
And they
Oh,
both-
yes.
Both died before.
Andrew Johnson was born in 1808. Lyndon Johnson was born in 1908. Go ahead, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I basically just read.
Yeah. Oh yeah, John Wilkes Booth was born in 1839. Lee Harvey Oswald was born in 1939. Both names have 15 letters. Let's see. Oh yeah, that's right. Lincoln was shot in a theater and ran and hid in a warehouse. Kennedy was shot in a warehouse and an assassin ran and hid in a theater. Both Oswald and Booth were shot dead before they could be brought to trial. A lot of persons believed that, well, in the case of Mr. Lincoln, there definitely was a conspiracy. And 4 people were hung, including a woman who, she ran a restaurant, what we did call a restaurant. And we have proven beyond reasonable doubt that she knew about the assassination, didn't report it, and she approved of it. And, but she was hung for conspiracy to commit murder of the president. So we know that the Lincoln assassination, well also there are 4 assassins. One of them was to kill Lincoln, another one was to kill Johnson, another one was to kill Grant, and the 4th one of course to kill someone, the Secretary of State Seward, Secretary of War Seward. Okay, Lincoln, Johnson, Grant, and Seward. 4 men, but the other 3 failed. This man who saw Grant's face in a glass while Grant was riding a coach, he lost his nerve, just couldn't pull the trigger. So Grant survived. The man who went after Seward was caught. But it was part of a big conspiracy. Was the Kennedy assassination part of a conspiracy? And folks, that's one of the biggest mysteries. Now, it still makes news because our present president promised he would release all the files about it. When he got in office, he released first one set of files, then released another. Oh yeah, now one of the files released was a file that said the CIA had plotted to kill Castro. Now folks, that's an act of war. Okay, even though today we wouldn't go to war because something happened more than 55 years ago. But the CIA plotted to kill Castro. Also, the CIA went to Mexico to look for Adolf Hitler, who they believed might be alive in Mexico. Now, if you think that's strange, why would Donald Trump be holding on to more files? I mean, he was supposed to release them all. He hasn't. And apparently now it looks like he won't. There's still a bunch of files that are so super, super secret. All right, we'll leave that. All right. I took more time with that than I realized. But anyway, Johnson took over, and Johnson immediately got to work. He got Kennedy's legislation passed. He got Medicare passed, medical care for the aged. He got federal aid passed for education. And folk, I got to say this. American education went downhill after the federal government got involved. If you don't like what I'm saying, go ahead and disagree. But, I mean, I taught in the public schools. My daughter taught in the public schools just this past year. She'll probably never teach again. The Civil Rights Act was passed. Food stamps were passed. Johnson got food stamps up. Medicare, yeah. And the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act. The Southern blacks were not allowed to vote in most of the South. In spite of the 15th Amendment that said they should have been, the Supreme Court had approved of literacy tests. In other words, you could require a literacy test in order to make sure a person was literate enough to vote. Now, does anybody know what did it take to pass a literacy test in the South before 1964? You had to have
You have land?
You had to be white. Thank you. You had to be white. Yeah. There's a story told that this actually happened. A black man with a PhD failed the literacy test, and an illiterate white man passed it. I don't mean to open up old racial wound, but at the same time, we don't want to sweep them under the rug. Just like I don't want to sweep the stolen election under the rug, or the fact that the country was against Kennedy because of Roman Catholicism. It happened. So I'm going to mention it because it's true history, and this is a history class. So, but I don't condone it. I voted for a Catholic for president once myself. So I won't tell you who. I'm not supposed to tell that. But nevertheless, there were millions of Americans who would not vote for Kennedy because he was a Catholic. So I want to make sure these things get told. And but anyway, literacy test. Oh yeah, poll tax. The poll tax was just high enough to keep most black people from voting, and make sure that only the richer people in the South voted. The poll tax was outlawed by the 24th Amendment that was passed during Kennedy's administration. The one amendment that was passed, not by him so much. Anyway, now, here's a sad part of the story. And again, we're talking about race here. In the North, the Northern people would say, hey, we allow blacks to vote, we are desegregated here, but in actual reality, the North was more segregated than the South. Northern blacks worshipped in separate churches from Northern whites, whereas in the South, a lot of times churches were integrated even before, and then even in the 1950s. But the black people in the North often lived in ghettos. The ghetto was a black section of this big city, and set up to maintain, to keep the whites and blacks separate. Race riots started in the South, but when it got, before it was over with, the race riots hit the North, and the race riots hit the northern cities with much more fervor than hit the southern cities. Yes?
I have a comment. Something I noticed since I've been living here in Georgia, because I was born and raised in California, and I'm just talking about how a lot of the cities look. I noticed here, in certain areas, there's churches,
Yes.
and then right behind the church or next to the church, on the church's grounds, is cemeteries.
Yeah, yeah,
And
much.
and like I never saw that until I
Mhm.
came here, and then it was someone that was have a conversation with me, and it explained to me that there was a time where if you were black or African American or whatever, you could not be buried in a cemetery with other races. You could not be buried in a cemetery with white people.
Yeah.
I mean, you had to you had to be buried over here.
Yeah, yeah.
It was
That is
separate.
true. That
Yeah.
is, and
Yeah,
since
I
this is a
mean-
history class, it's appropriate that we.
I'm just bringing it up
on.
about
Yeah.
history.
Not because we want to keep the wounds going.
No, no,
We
no,
wanna-
no.
We want to put it behind us, see, but we must talk
But
about
I mean, I'm just bringing it up because I didn't see this until I came to Georgia, and I said,
Well, yeah.
I'm like, oh my Lord, cemeteries like right
Well,
there?
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing about the northern segregation, it was more hypocritical. In the South, the southern people, you knew they were racist. But in the North, they would claim they were not racist, when actually they were more racist in the Southern. That is why when the riots broke out, and I'm talking about Detroit, Michigan, Newark, New Jersey, Toledo, Ohio, Youngstown, Ohio, Middletown, Ohio. I mean, when the race riots hit the northern cities, they hit with fervor that was not seen in the South. Much, much more violent. Martin Luther King Jr. led the movement for equality. Martin Luther King Jr. was from here in Atlanta, and we have a King Center where he which I've been to twice and taken all three of my children to. But he operated from Atlanta, and he went through the South, encouraging blacks to register to vote and encouraging blacks to resist segregation. For instance, there were one time white-only restrooms and black-only restrooms. The black restroom was usually far inferior to the white one, far. And Martin Luther King said, we're going to use the same bathrooms that white people use. He advocated nonviolence. He was a copy of Mahatma Gandhi in India. Malcolm X said we can't achieve what we want without violence, so he advocated violence. Both men met violent deaths. Leaving race for a time, the students in my generation rioted a lot. The big riot was over the Vietnam War, but your book says there were other things too. The professors of the day seemed to be totally indifferent to the needs of the pupils. I mean, there was a case where a person was involved in a swimming meet on the day of the final exam. He got cramps, so he was a little bit late getting to class. But the professor locked the door and said, until you learn to come to class, now you can't take my course. And there was only one test given. That was the final exam. Now this happened a lot in my day. You might get 2 tests, the midterm and the final, or you might just get 1. He had to repeat the course all over again. Now I don't know if this could go on today or not. We are expected to be more lenient and tolerant of certain things like that. But in those days, professors were known to be cold and uncaring. A typical classroom consisted, I saw this, of more than 120 students, maybe 150 joining students, all meeting in a big, big auditorium. And a teacher would stand up and lecture, and then he'd give a test. He would never bother to even try to learn your names. Very, very impersonal, very, very cold seeming. And the students of my generation began to protest, but particularly protest the Vietnam War. The protest reached a climax at Kent State University when the National Guard was called in to restore order. And as somebody, I don't know if we ever found out who ordered or why, but some guardsmen opened fire, wounded about 10 students, killed 4 students. The 4 students they killed were just going about their business, not even involved in the rioting. Now, with all respect to the guardsmen, they were having bottles and bricks thrown at them and sticks thrown at them by these protesting students. Yet the young men who died, were not protesting. They were just going about their business. There had been a lot said in Ohio. The governor moved in and closed all colleges immediately and ordered every student to leave and said that it was almost final exam time, but they said you'll take your final exams some other time, by a few at a time, by correspondence or whatever, any way you can, but leave the campus immediately. And every one of the students on campus in the state college in Ohio was sent home early. The rioting died down largely as a result of the de-escalation and the eventually leaving of the Vietnam War. Two organizations that were involved with race, SCLC, Dr. King led the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Another one was the NAACP, it had been around for a long time, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. There also was CORE, or the Congress of Racial Equality. All right, so much for race for now. President Johnson called his welfare program the Great Society. Well, our presidents don't name their administrations anymore. They have mottos. The present motto is "Make America Great Again." But let's see. Theodore Roosevelt called his the Square Deal. Truman called his the Fair Deal. Franklin Roosevelt called his the New Deal. And Johnson called his the Great Society. Kennedy called his the New Frontier. New Frontier. Great Society. He declared a war on poverty. That might have been somewhat successful. The thing about poverty, folk, it's always going to be here. And try as we might, all right, socialists will say, oh, we can eliminate it. Try as we might, we never have. The poor have always been here, the poor will always be. While Johnson was in office, the Vietnam War escalated, and students began to protest it, particularly after 1964, from 1964 to 1970. There was a lot of unrest. After 1970, for the most part, the student riots stopped. Race riots would flare up again from time to time. President Nixon was elected, this might sound ironic, if you have President Nixon elected on a law and order platform, law and order, and to think he goes down in history as the biggest lawbreaker we ever had, law and order platform, he was also elected on a white backlash. Now, the white backlash, yeah, okay, it was brought about largely by the Supreme Court ordering busing. Now, folk, this is one decision the Supreme Court made that simply both sides chose to ignore. Essentially what happened, the Supreme Court ordered that buses be used to transport black children to primarily white schools and white children to primarily black schools to achieve racial integration and to force racial integration. Today, public schools are more segregated than ever, but it's by choice, not a mandate. Both sides simply eventually ignored the busing. Now, first it happened, but both sides simply ignored the busing. The blacks never took it back to the court, the whites never did either. So the busing is one decision they made that simply both sides refused to abide by. Black parents got to where they preferred to send their children to black schools. And today, again, the schools are more segregated than ever. But by choice, not by mandate, not because they have to. It's a matter of choice. You can't have a white-only school. I was asked one time by an engineer at Lockheed, how come there were no white-only schools? That when the smoke cleared, that's what was left. The blacks have their schools because they choose to. And it just, when all the smoke had cleared, that was what was left. The white backlash led to white people rising up and saying, enough is enough. Democrats on both parties, North and South, supported Nixon. Nixon was elected president in 1968.
I want to make a comment about the schools.
Okay. Yeah.
What I've noticed, but of course you have way more knowledge. Of course you work in the school district, what have you, before.
Yeah.
A lot of times, certain minorities or whatever can't attend whatever schools because now, and it's been for a long time, your demographics. If you live in a certain area, you can't go to a better school. If I live in Camp Creek area, I can't go to school in Buckhead because they want to know.
The demographics will often be something, really, really crazy like this. I mean, if you look at a map of the demographics, follow what I'm saying. It won't be a straight line to say this people living here. It'll be a line, that's these people living in this side of the line go here, and the people living on this side of the line go here.
And unfortunately, not in all cases, but in some cases, low socioeconomic citizens that fall within these particular.
What we might call poor people.
Poor people.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, sometimes the schools that they attend in that particular area, sometimes funding is not.
I know what you mean.
Adequate
Property taxes.
Is not right. And see, I didn't know this either. I see there's a lot of things I didn't know either. That a lot of times when we have the city or whatever, or how things are ran, areas that where you have the citizens that pay the most taxes, they tend to get the most. Their needs are responded quicker. In other words, certain areas,
Well,
these are the
This
taxpayers.
is true, whether it be building roads, building bridges.
I don't care what it is.
I know.
I didn't know this, and I was wondering, I'm like, how come in this area, it seems like it takes forever for somebody to come out and fix these streets or whatever. And then somebody hit me too. They said, listen, this area here, it's not a lot of taxpayers here. These people are not putting in the pot. So they don't get things responded to as fast. I didn't know that. I mean, it may be off subject, but it is life.
It's life. Okay, I'll tell you what now. I'm going to